It all started with a simple text message from my friend Alex. "Hey, we're planning a trip to my cousin's cabin next weekend. You in?" I stared at my phone, a mix of excitement and disappointment washing over me. The idea of escaping the city for a weekend in the wilderness was incredibly appealing, but I knew immediately that my work schedule would make it impossible to join them on their planned departure date. "Sorry, can't make it that day. Work's got me tied up," I typed back, feeling a pang of regret. Alex's response came quickly. "No worries, man. Why don't you join us a day later? The cabin's big enough and we'll save you a bunk." I hesitated for a moment. The thought of making the journey alone was a bit daunting, but the prospect of missing out entirely was even worse. "You know what? I'm in. I'll head up the next day," I replied, already feeling a surge of anticipation. As Alex filled me in on the details, I realized this wasn't going to be your typical cabin getaway. The place was seriously remote, no roads leading to it, accessible only by a challenging hiking trail that would take the better part of a day to traverse. The isolation appealed to me, a chance to truly disconnect from the world and recharge. "One thing, though," Alex added, "the last part of the trail is pretty treacherous, especially if you don't know it. You'll probably have to camp overnight before tackling that section." I paused, considering this new information. Camping alone wasn't something I'd done before, but the idea intrigued me. It would be an adventure, a chance to prove something to myself. "No problem," I responded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm up for the challenge." As I ended the conversation with Alex and started to plan for the trip, I couldn't shake a strange feeling, a mix of excitement and apprehension. Little did I know, this solo camping experience would turn out to be far more than the simple adventure I was anticipating. The week leading up to the trip flew by in a flurry of preparation. I threw myself into researching solo camping tips, watching countless YouTube videos, and reading through wilderness survival guides. Despite never having camped alone before, I was determined to be as prepared as possible. I made multiple trips to the outdoor supply store, each visit adding to my growing collection of gear. A compact one-person tent, a state-of-the-art sleeping bag rated for low temperatures, a portable stove, water purification tablets. My list seemed endless. The salesperson, a grizzled old man with a beard that would make a lumberjack jealous, eyed me with a mixture of amusement and concern. "First time soloing, eh?" he asked as I piled my items on the counter. I nodded, trying not to let my nervousness show. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from his very core. "You've got that look about you, excited but scared shitless." I couldn't help but laugh. He'd nailed it perfectly. The old man leaned in, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "Listen, kid, the wilderness, she's beautiful, but she can be cruel. Respect her and you'll be fine. But never, ever let your guard down. Got it?" I nodded solemnly, his words sending a shiver down my spine. As I left the store, my arms laden with bags, his warning echoed in my mind. Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The night before my departure, I meticulously packed and repacked my backpack, checking and double-checking my supplies. Maps, compass, first aid kit, extra batteries for my flashlight. Everything found its designated spot. As I zipped up the pack, a sense of accomplishment washed over me. I was ready, or so I thought. The morning of my departure dawned crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day. I loaded my gear into my car and set off, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. As I drove further from the city, the landscape gradually transformed. Concrete and steel gave way to rolling hills and dense forests, the fall foliage a riot of reds, oranges, and yellows. I arrived at the trailhead parking lot just as the sun reached its zenith. A few other cars were scattered about, likely belonging to my friends who had set out the day before. I shouldered my pack, its weight a reminder of the journey ahead, and took my first steps onto the trail. The initial part of the hike was relatively easy. a well-maintained path winding through sun-dappled woods. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and pine. As I walked, I felt the stresses of city life melting away, replaced by a growing sense of peace and connection with nature. However, as the hours wore on and the trail became more challenging, that peace was gradually replaced by physical exertion. The path grew steeper, riddled with rocks and tree roots that threatened to trip me at every step. My pack, which had felt manageable at first, now seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. By late afternoon, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I had covered a good distance, but I knew I still had a long way to go. As the shadows lengthened and the light began to fade, I started to look for a suitable campsite. The old man's words from the store came back to me. Respect the wilderness and never let your guard down. Just as I was beginning to worry that I'd have to set up camp in less than ideal conditions, I stumbled upon a small clearing. It was perfect, about 40 feet across, relatively flat, with a natural boundary of dense trees surrounding it. A sense of relief washed over me. This would be home for the night. As I began to set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, peering into the deepening gloom of the forest. But each time, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. I told myself it was just nerves, the natural apprehension of being alone in the wilderness for the first time. Still, a nagging sense of unease persisted, a feeling that this night might hold more than I had bargained for. With my tent pitched and secured, I set about gathering wood for a fire. The process was therapeutic, the repetitive motion of collecting and arranging the kindling and larger logs helping to calm my nerves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples, I finally got the fire going. The warmth and light of the flames were comforting, pushing back the encroaching darkness and creating a cozy circle of illumination. I sat back feeling a sense of accomplishment. I had made it this far, set up camp, and started a fire all on my own. Maybe this solo camping thing wasn't so daunting after all. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I busied myself with dinner preparations. I pulled out the pack of hot dogs I'd brought along, finding a suitable stick to use as a makeshift roasting spit. The sizzle and pop of the hot dogs over the fire, combined with the crackling of the flames, created a soothing soundtrack to the evening. After dinner, I treated myself to the quintessential camping dessert, s'mores. The combination of gooey marshmallow, melted chocolate, and crisp graham cracker was heavenly. And for a moment, all my earlier anxieties melted away like the chocolate on my tongue. As I sat there, basking in the fire's glow and enjoying the peaceful solitude, I began to reflect on the day's journey. The physical challenge had been invigorating, pushing me out of my comfort zone and showing me what I was capable of. There was something profoundly satisfying about relying solely on myself, carrying everything I needed on my back. However, as the night wore on, that sense of peaceful solitude began to shift into something less comfortable. The darkness beyond the fire's reach seemed to grow deeper, more oppressive. The sounds of the forest, which had been a pleasant backdrop during the day, now took on a more ominous tone. It started with small noises, the rustle of leaves, the snapping of twigs. At first, I dismissed them as the natural sounds of the woods at night. But as time passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that these sounds had a pattern to them. It was as if something was moving around the clearing, circling just beyond the reach of the firelight. I tried to rationalize it. The woods were full of nocturnal animals, after all. It was probably just a curious fox or raccoon, drawn by the scent of my dinner. But as the circling continued, making 4 or 5 complete revolutions around the clearing, my unease grew. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, I decided to investigate. As soon as I stood up, the noises ceased abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could have sworn I heard something larger moving quickly away through the underbrush. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, straining my ears for any further sounds. But the woods had gone eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Shaking off the lingering sense of unease, I told myself it was just my imagination running wild. I was alone in the woods for the first time. Of course, I was a bit jumpy. Deciding it was time to turn in for the night, I carefully extinguished the fire, making sure every ember was out. As darkness engulfed the clearing, I retreated to my tent, zipping myself securely inside. Despite my earlier scare, exhaustion soon overtook me, and I drifted off into a fitful sleep, unaware that the night's events were far from over. I'm not sure how long I slept before the whispers began. At first, they insinuated themselves into my dreams, a barely audible murmur that I couldn't quite make out. Gradually, as I hovered in that liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, I became aware that the whispers were real, coming from just outside my tent. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding in my chest. I lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as I strained my ears to make sense of what I was hearing. The voice, or voices I couldn't be sure, were just above a whisper, the words indistinct and muffled. For a wild moment I wondered if it could be my friends, having perhaps decided to come looking for me. But no, that made no sense. They were miles away at the cabin, and in any case, why would they be whispering outside my tent in the middle of the night? As I listened, I realized I couldn't understand what was being said. It didn't sound like English, or any language I recognized. The syllables were strange, almost guttural, with an odd rhythmic quality that sent shivers down my spine. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen in fear, listening to those impossible whispers. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the face of this inexplicable phenomenon. Just as I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind, if this was all some vivid hallucination brought on by the stress of camping alone, something happened that proved all too real. A hand, or something like a hand, pressed against the side of my tent, down near my feet. In the faint moonlight filtering through the tent fabric, I could see the clear impression of fingers, pressing insistently against the nylon. Panic surged through me, jolting me into action. I sat up quickly, a strangled cry escaping my lips. The reaction was instantaneous. Whatever was outside my tent took off at a sprint, crashing through the underbrush with a speed that seemed impossible for the dense forest surrounding my campsite. For a long moment, I sat there in the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind reeling from what had just happened. When I finally gathered the courage to unzip the tent and peer outside, flashlight in hand, the clearing was empty. The beam of light revealed nothing but trees and shadows, no sign of whatever had been out there moments before. With shaking hands, I examined the spot where the hand had pressed against the tent. I half expected to find a muddy print or some other tangible evidence of the encounter. But there was nothing. The fabric was clean and undisturbed. Sleep was out of the question after that. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched in my hand, jumping at every sound. As the first faint light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I had never been so glad to see the sun. As soon as it was light enough to see clearly, I broke camp with a speed born of desperation. My hands shook as I packed up my gear, constantly glancing over my shoulder at the surrounding woods. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I didn't bother with breakfast, couldn't even stomach the thought of food. All I wanted was to get out of there, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever had visited my camp in the night. The hike that day was a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. The trail, which should have become easier as it approached the cabin, seemed to grow more challenging with each step. Or maybe it was just my frayed nerves and lack of sleep making everything more difficult. I pushed myself hard, barely stopping for rest or water. The events of the night played on a loop in my mind. The whispers, the hand on the tent, the impossible speed of whatever had fled into the woods. None of it made sense, and yet I couldn't deny what I'd experienced. As I hiked, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Could it have been some kind of animal? But what animal whispers in an unknown language? A person, then? But who would be out there in the middle of nowhere? And why would they flee like that? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming yesterday, now felt oppressive and alien. Every shadow held potential threats. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. I found myself constantly looking back over my shoulder, half expecting to see something emerging from the trees behind me. It was late afternoon by the time I finally caught sight of the cabin. The wave of relief that washed over me was so intense it nearly brought me to my knees. I stumbled the last few hundred yards, my legs weak with exhaustion and residual fear. As I approached, I could hear the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting from the cabin. The normality of it was jarring after the surreal experience of the night before. For a moment, I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, suddenly unsure of how to explain what had happened, or if I even should. But then, the door opened, and Alex stepped out onto the porch. The look of concern on his face when he saw me told me I must have looked as bad as I felt. "Hey, man, we were starting to worry about you." "Are you okay?" he called out, jogging over to meet me. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him everything that had happened. But looking at his worried face, at the cozy cabin behind him filled with our friends, I faltered. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? "Yeah, I'm fine," I heard myself say. "Just a rough night camping. I'm glad to be here." Alex clapped me on the shoulder, steering me towards the cabin. "Well, you're here now. Come on in. Get some food in you. You look like you could use it." As we walked towards the warmth and light of the cabin, I glanced back one last time at the dark line of trees behind me. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the shadows, a flicker of motion just at the edge of my vision. But when I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Shaking my head, I turned back to the cabin. Whatever had happened out there in the woods, whatever I had encountered, it was behind me now. At least, that's what I told myself as I stepped over the threshold, leaving the wilderness and its mysteries behind. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they rang hollow. The whispers I'd heard, the touch on my tent, those weren't ordinary forest noises. They were something else entirely, something I couldn't explain or rationalize away. Alex steered me towards the kitchen area, pressing a cold beer into my hand. "Here, you look like you could use this. Dinner's almost ready, Lisa's famous chili. It'll warm you right up." I nodded gratefully, taking a long swig of the beer. The familiar taste helped ground me, reminding me that I was safe now, surrounded by friends. As I sank into one of the chairs at the kitchen table, I felt some of the tension begin to leave my body. Lisa, Alex's girlfriend and our designated chef for the trip, ladled out a generous portion of chili into a bowl and set it in front of me. The spicy aroma made my stomach growl, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since the previous night's campfire hot dogs. As I ate, my friends chatted around me, filling me in on their hike up to the cabin and the adventures they'd had while waiting for me to arrive. I tried to engage, to lose myself in their stories and laughter, but my mind kept drifting back to the clearing and the unsettling events of the night. "So, how was your solo camping experience?" Tom asked, his tone light and curious. "Think you'll do it again?" I froze for a moment, my spoon halfway to my mouth. How could I answer that? The truth was, the thought of camping alone again filled me with dread, but I couldn't explain why without sounding crazy. "It was interesting," I finally said, choosing my words carefully. "Definitely a learning experience." Tom nodded, seemingly satisfied with my vague answer. But I caught Sarah giving me a quizzical look, her brow furrowed slightly. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it and turned back to her conversation with Lisa. As the evening wore on, I found myself relaxing slightly. The warmth of the cabin, the good food, and the companionship of my friends began to push the memories of the previous night to the back of my mind. But they didn't disappear entirely. Every now and then, a sudden noise from outside, a branch scraping against the window, the hoot of an owl, would make me jump, my heart racing as I half expected to hear those eerie whispers again. When it came time for bed, I felt a surge of relief. The cabin had 4 small bedrooms, each with bunk beds. I was sharing with Alex, and the thought of not being alone as I slept was immensely comforting. As I lay in the bottom bunk, listening to Alex's steady breathing above me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Should I tell someone about what had happened? Would they even believe me if I did? And if it was real, what exactly had I encountered out there in the woods? Sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally did, it was filled with unsettling dreams of shadowy figures and whispered words in an unknown tongue. I woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of muffled conversation from the main room. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, I felt a surge of panic. Then I remembered where I was, safe in the cabin, surrounded by friends. As I made my way to the kitchen, I found most of the group already up and about. Lisa was at the stove, flipping pancakes, while others nursed mugs of coffee around the table. "Morning, sleepyhead," Alex greeted me cheerfully. "We were starting to wonder if you were going to sleep all day." I mumbled a greeting, gratefully accepting the mug of coffee Sarah held out to me. As I sipped the hot, bitter liquid, I felt some of the fog in my brain begin to clear. "So what's the plan for today?" I asked, hoping to divert attention from my late appearance and disheveled state. "We were thinking of hiking up to the ridge," Tom said, spreading a map out on the table. "There's supposed to be an amazing view of the valley from up there." The others nodded enthusiastically, but I felt a knot form in my stomach. The thought of going back into those woods filled me with dread. But how could I explain my reluctance without revealing what had happened? "Sounds great," I heard myself say, even as my mind screamed in protest. As we geared up for the hike, I couldn't shake my unease. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig made me flinch. I tried to tell myself it was just leftover nerves from my solo camping experience, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The hike itself was beautiful. The autumn colors were in full display, the trees a riot of reds, golds, and oranges. Under different circumstances, I would have been in awe of the natural beauty surrounding us. But I couldn't relax, couldn't lose myself in the experience. I kept finding myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees for... what? I wasn't even sure. We reached the ridge around midday. The view was indeed spectacular, the valley spread out below us like a patchwork quilt of forest and meadow. As my friends oohed and awed, taking photos and pointing out landmarks, I stood slightly apart, my eyes drawn to the dense forest we had just traversed. "Hey, you okay?" Sarah's voice startled me out of my reverie. She had approached quietly, her face etched with concern. I turned to her, ready to brush off her question with another vague reassurance. But something in her expression stopped me. She looked genuinely worried, and for a moment I was tempted to confide in her, to share the burden of what I had experienced. I began, then hesitated. How could I even begin to explain? "I just had a weird experience while camping. It's probably nothing, but..." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, and she leaned in closer. "What kind of weird experience?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, a shout from Tom interrupted us. "Hey guys, check this out!" We turned to see Tom pointing excitedly at something on the ground. As we gathered around, I saw what had caught his attention. A set of strange, elongated footprints in a patch of soft earth. "What do you think made these?" Lisa asked, her voice hushed with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I stared at the prints, a chill running down my spine. They were unlike anything I had ever seen before, too long and narrow to be human, but not matching any animal tracks I was familiar with. As the others speculated and debated, I remained silent, my mind racing. Could these tracks be connected to what I had experienced in the clearing? And if so, what exactly were we dealing with out here in these remote woods? The discovery of the tracks cast a somber mood over the group as we began our descent back to the cabin. The carefree atmosphere of the morning hike was gone, replaced by a tense vigilance. Even those who had dismissed the tracks as nothing unusual seemed affected by the change in atmosphere. As we walked, I found myself falling into step beside Sarah. She glanced at me, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "So," she said quietly, ensuring the others couldn't overhear, "what were you going to tell me before, about your weird experience?" I hesitated, weighing my options. Part of me desperately wanted to share what had happened, to have someone else validate my experience. But another part feared being dismissed or, worse, thought crazy. "It's complicated," I finally said. "I'm not even sure what happened, to be honest." Sarah nodded slowly. "Sometimes talking about it can help, you know, even if you can't explain it." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Okay," I said, "but not here. Back at the cabin, maybe?" She agreed, and we continued our hike in silence. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful yesterday, now felt oppressive and threatening. Every shadow held potential dangers. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. As we filed inside, I caught Sarah's eye. She nodded almost imperceptibly, a silent agreement to our earlier conversation. As the others busied themselves with dinner preparations and reliving the day's hike, Sarah and I slipped out onto the cabin's small back porch. The woods loomed dark and silent beyond the small circle of light cast by the porch lamp. "All right," Sarah said, turning to face me. "What happened out there?" And so, with the forest as our witness, I began to recount my experience in the clearing. As I spoke, giving voice to the fear and confusion I had been carrying, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Whatever had happened out there in the woods, I was no longer facing it alone. As I finished recounting my experience, Sarah stood silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dark line of trees beyond the porch. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and thoughtful. "You know, my grandmother used to tell stories about these woods," she said, still not looking at me. "Old stories, passed down through generations. I always thought they were just fairy tales, meant to keep kids from wandering too far into the forest." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. "What kind of stories?" Sarah turned to face me, her expression serious. "Stories about the forest folk, creatures that weren't quite human, that lived deep in the woods where people rarely ventured. They were said to be curious about humans, but also dangerous if crossed." I stared at her, my mind racing. Could there be some truth to these old stories? Could they explain what I had encountered? Did these stories mention anything about the forest folk, whispering or moving incredibly fast? I asked, hardly daring to breathe as I waited for her answer. Sarah nodded slowly. The whispers were said to be how they communicated with each other. And yes, they were supposed to be incredibly quick and agile in the forest, able to disappear in the blink of an eye. A shiver ran down my spine. The parallels to my experience were uncanny. But surely these were just stories, myths born from the human tendency to create explanations for the unknown. "But that's impossible," I said, more to convince myself than anything else. "These are just old tales, right? There has to be a rational explanation for what happened." Sarah shrugged, her gaze drifting back to the forest. "Maybe. But think about those tracks we found today. They didn't look like anything we could explain, did they?" I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. She had a point. Those tracks had been unlike anything I'd ever seen before. "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling suddenly very small and vulnerable in the face of the vast unknown forest. "We be careful," Sarah said firmly. "We stick together, we don't go into the woods alone, and we keep our eyes open. And maybe we do some research when we get back to civilization. See if there are any other stories or reports of strange encounters in these woods." I nodded, grateful for her practical approach. It made the whole situation feel a little less overwhelming, a little more manageable. As we stood there on the porch, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted out from the cabin behind us. Our friends, oblivious to the potential danger lurking in the woods, were going about their evening as usual. "Should we tell the others?" I asked, torn between the desire to warn them and the fear of being dismissed or ridiculed. Sarah considered for a moment. "Not yet," she said finally. "Let's wait and see if anything else happens. For now, we'll just keep a close eye on things." As we turned to go back inside, a sudden movement at the edge of the forest caught my eye. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching us. But when I blinked and looked again, there was nothing but shadows and trees. "Did you see that?" I whispered urgently to Sarah. She squinted into the darkness, then shook her head. "No, what was it?" I described what I thought I'd seen, my heart racing. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It could have been a deer," she said, but her tone suggested she didn't really believe it. "Or maybe it was something else. Either way, I think we should head inside now." As we retreated into the warmth and light of the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest suddenly seemed alive with hidden presences, secrets, and dangers we were only beginning to understand. That night, as I lay in my bunk trying to sleep, every creak of the cabin and rustle of wind in the trees outside set my nerves on edge. I found myself straining to hear those eerie whispers again, both dreading and half expecting them. But the night passed uneventfully, and as dawn broke, I began to wonder if perhaps I had overreacted. Maybe it had all been a product of my imagination, fueled by the stress of camping alone for the first time. Yet, as I looked out the window at the misty forest beyond, I couldn't quite convince myself of that. Something was out there, something that defied easy explanation. And I had a feeling that before this trip was over, we might just come face to face with the truth behind the legends of the forest folk. Little did I know the real adventure and danger was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a strange mix of normalcy and underlying tension. On the surface, our group continued with the planned activities: hiking, fishing in the nearby stream, telling stories around the campfire at night. But for Sarah and me, every excursion into the woods was tinged with a heightened awareness, a constant vigilance for anything out of the ordinary. We didn't see anything as overtly strange as the tracks we'd found that first day, but there were oddities. Moments when the forest would fall unnaturally silent, as if holding its breath. Glimpses of movement just at the edge of our vision, gone when we turned to look directly. Once, while on a hike, I could have sworn I heard that eerie whispering again, carried on the wind, but it was gone before I could be sure. Sarah and I kept these observations to ourselves, not wanting to alarm the others without concrete evidence. But I could tell the strain was starting to wear on both of us. We were jumpy, quick to startle at unexpected noises, our eyes constantly scanning the trees around us. It was on the fourth day of our stay that things took a more dramatic turn. We had split into two groups for the day. Tom, Lisa, and Alex had gone for a longer hike to a nearby waterfall, while Sarah, myself, and the remaining two members of our group, Mike and Emily, had opted for a more leisurely day of fishing and exploring closer to the cabin. We were following the stream that ran near the cabin, looking for a good spot to set up our fishing gear, when Emily suddenly stopped short. "Guys," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "Look at this." We gathered around where she was pointing. There, in the soft mud of the stream bank, was a set of footprints. They were similar to the ones we'd found on the ridge, elongated, with strange proportions that didn't match any animal we knew. But these were fresher, the edges still crisp and well-defined. What made these?" Mike asked, his earlier skepticism about our caution in the woods now replaced by clear unease. Sarah and I exchanged a glance. This was the moment we'd been half expecting, half dreading. Concrete evidence that something unusual was indeed in these woods. "We're not sure," Sarah said carefully, "but we've seen tracks like these before, and there have been other things, strange noises, movements in the trees." As Sarah began to explain some of our observations over the past few days, I found my attention drawn to the forest around us. The usual background noise of birds and small animals had gone quiet, replaced by an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. And then I saw it. Just for a moment, a flash of movement between the trees, a figure, tall and lean, moving with an unnatural fluidity. It was there, and gone so quickly I might have thought I imagined it, if not for the sharp intake of breath from Emily that told me she'd seen it too. "We need to get back to the cabin," I said, cutting off the ongoing discussion. "Now." Something in my tone must have conveyed the urgency I felt, because no one argued. We quickly gathered our gear and set off back toward the cabin at a brisk pace. As we walked, I could feel eyes on us. The sensation of being watched was so intense it was almost physical, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. Every shadow seemed to hold potential threats, every rustle in the underbrush a cause for alarm. We were about halfway back to the cabin when we heard it. That same eerie whispering I'd heard in my tent that first night. But this time, it wasn't just me. From the wide-eyed looks of shock and fear on the faces of my companions, I knew they could hear it too. The whispers seemed to come from all around us, a cacophony of unintelligible sounds that were somehow both enticing and terrifying. They rose and fell in pitch, sometimes sounding almost melodic, other times harsh and guttural. "Run!" Sarah shouted, breaking the spell of fear that had momentarily frozen us in place. We took off at a sprint, our fishing gear forgotten in our haste to escape. The forest seemed to come alive around us, branches reaching out as if to grab us, roots rising up to trip our feet. The whispers followed us, sometimes seeming to come from right beside us, other times from far away. As we ran, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, tall, lithe figures darting between the trees with impossible speed and grace. But every time I tried to look directly at them, they vanished, leaving me questioning if I'd really seen anything at all. We burst out of the tree line into the clearing where the cabin stood, gasping for breath and wild-eyed with fear. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the whispers had been. It was as if we'd crossed some invisible boundary, beyond which our pursuers couldn't or wouldn't follow. What was that?" Emily panted, her face pale with shock. Before anyone could answer, the cabin door burst open. Tom, Lisa, and Alex spilled out, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. "We heard shouting," Alex said, hurrying towards us. "What happened? Are you guys okay?" Sarah and I exchanged a look. There was no hiding it now. We had to tell them everything. As we sat around the cabin's main room, mugs of hot tea in hand to calm our nerves, Sarah and I took turns explaining everything that had happened since my first night alone in the woods. We told them about the whispers, the strange tracks, the fleeting glimpses of impossible creatures moving through the trees. To their credit, our friends listened without interruption, their expressions growing more serious with each revelation. When we finished, there was a long moment of silence as everyone processed what they'd heard. "So," Tom said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "you're saying there are, what? Some kind of forest creatures out there, watching us? Following us?" I nodded, bracing myself for disbelief or ridicule, but to my surprise, Tom just nodded thoughtfully. "You know," he said slowly, "I thought I saw something weird yesterday on our hike to the waterfall. A figure in the trees, moving faster than anything I've ever seen. I told myself I was imagining things, but now..." One by one, the others chimed in with their own stories, odd experiences they dismissed or rationalized away over the past few days. A strange silence falling over the forest, unexplained noises in the night, a feeling of being watched. "Okay," Alex said, taking charge as he often did in difficult situations. "So assuming all of this is real, what do we do? Do we leave?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Part of me wanted nothing more than to pack up and get as far away from these woods as possible. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and the unknown, was reluctant to leave without answers. "I don't think we should leave," Sarah said, voicing my own thoughts. "At least, not yet. Whatever these beings are, they haven't actually harmed us. They seem curious about us, maybe even trying to communicate in their own way." "Are you suggesting we try to make contact?" Lisa asked, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. Sarah shrugged. "Maybe. Or at least, maybe we could try to understand them better. We have 2 more days before we're supposed to leave. We could use that time to observe, to gather more information." There was a murmur of discussion as everyone considered this idea. I could see the fear in their eyes, but also a growing curiosity. We had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. It was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. "If we're going to do this," I said, "we need to be smart about it. No one goes into the woods alone. We stay in pairs or groups at all times, and we need some way to document what we see and hear." The others nodded in agreement. We spent the next hour planning our approach, deciding on safety protocols and discussing how best to record our observations. As night fell, there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. We were no longer just on a casual camping trip. We had become investigators of the unknown, explorers on the edge of a mystery that defied explanation. That night, as I lay in my bunk unable to sleep, I found myself straining to hear those eerie whispers again, but the night remained silent, as if the forest and its mysterious inhabitants were holding their breath, waiting to see what we would do next. Little did we know, our decision to stay and investigate would lead us down a path of discovery and danger beyond anything we could have imagined. The true nature of the forest folk was about to be revealed, and with it, a truth that would change our understanding of the world forever. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the autumn air carrying a hint of wood smoke from our cabin's chimney. We gathered around the kitchen table, going over our plan one last time before venturing out into the forest. We had decided to split into 2 groups. Sarah, Mike, and I would head towards the area where we had first encountered the strange tracks and heard the whispers. Alex, Lisa, Emily, and Tom would stay closer to the cabin, keeping watch and maintaining a base of operations. As we prepared to leave, Alex handed each of us a small device. 2-way radios, he explained. Keep in constant contact. If anything happens, anything at all, you let us know immediately. We nodded, the weight of the radios in our hands a reassuring link to safety. With a final glance back at the cabin, Sarah, Mike, and I set off into the woods. The forest seemed different now that we were actively looking for signs of the unknown. Every shadow held potential secrets, every unexpected sound a possible clue. We moved slowly, our senses on high alert, cameras and voice recorders at the ready. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. We found a few more of the strange tracks, photographing them meticulously and taking measurements. But of the creatures themselves, we saw no sign. It was nearing midday when everything changed. We had stopped in a small clearing to rest and eat a quick lunch when Sarah suddenly stiffened, her eyes fixed on a point just beyond the tree line. "There," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you see it?" I followed her gaze, my heart pounding. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, slowly, a figure seemed to materialize from the very bark of a large oak tree. It was tall, easily 7 feet in height, with a slender, almost ethereal build. Its skin was a mottled pattern of browns and greens that seemed to shift and change as it moved, blending perfectly with the forest around it. But it was the face that truly captured my attention. Large, almond-shaped eyes of a deep forest green regarded us with unmistakable intelligence. There was no nose that I could discern, and the mouth was just a thin line that didn't move as a series of soft whistles and clicks emanated from it. "Oh my God," Mike breathed beside me. "It's real. They're real." As if in response to his words, more figures began to appear from the surrounding trees. 5, then 10, then more than I could count. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their bodies seeming to flow rather than walk. I raised my camera with shaking hands, hardly daring to breathe as I snapped photo after photo. Sarah was whispering a running commentary into her voice recorder, while Mike stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. The beings made no move to approach us, but neither did they retreat. They simply stood there, watching us with those large, inscrutable eyes. The forest had fallen completely silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, I reached for the radio at my belt. "Alex," I whispered into it, "are you there? You need to get out here. Now, we've made contact." There was a burst of static. Then Alex's voice came through, tense with excitement and concern. "We're on our way. Don't move. Don't do anything to provoke them." As we waited for the others to arrive, one of the beings, the first one we had seen, took a step forward. Its movement was so fluid, it seemed to glide across the forest floor. It stopped about 10 feet away from us, its head tilted slightly to one side in what seemed like curiosity. Then, to our utter amazement, it spoke. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard before, a complex series of whistles, clicks, and what sounded almost like wind through leaves. But underneath it all, I could have sworn I heard words. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, but definitely words. Sarah, her voice shaking with excitement, whispered into her recorder, "They're trying to communicate. They're actually trying to talk to us." As the being continued its strange speech, more of its kind moved forward to join it. They formed a loose semicircle around us, their eyes never leaving our faces. I had the unsettling feeling that they were studying us, just as intently as we were studying them. Just then, we heard the sound of running feet and breaking branches. Alex and the others burst into the clearing, their faces flushed with exertion and excitement. They skidded to a halt as they took in the scene before them. For a long moment, humans and forest beings regarded each other in silence. Then slowly, deliberately, the being who had spoken raised one long-fingered hand in what was unmistakably a gesture of greeting. We stood on the precipice of something monumental, a first contact scenario that would change everything we thought we knew about our world and our place in it. As I raised my own hand in response, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next, and how would this encounter change us, all of us, forever. The next few hours passed in a blur of excitement and frantic activity. We set up a makeshift research station in the clearing, cameras and audio equipment trained on our newfound forest companions. The beings seemed content to stay, watching us with those large, enigmatic eyes as we scurried about our tasks. Alex, who had some linguistics background from college, took charge of trying to establish communication. He started with simple gestures, pointing to himself and saying his name, then pointing to various objects and naming them. The forest beings watched intently, occasionally mimicking his gestures with their fluid grace. It was Lisa who made the breakthrough. A biology major, she had been recording the various sounds the beings made, trying to discern patterns. "Guys," she called out excitedly, "I think I've got something." We gathered around her laptop as she played back a series of recordings. "Listen," she said, pointing to the sound waves on the screen. "There's a definite structure here. It's not random noise. This is a language." As we listened more closely, we began to hear it too. The whistles and clicks weren't just random sounds. They had rhythm, repetition, variations that suggested meaning. It was utterly alien, yet undeniably a form of communication. "But how do we decode it?" Tom asked, voicing the question on all our minds. "We start simple," Alex said, a determined glint in his eye. "Basic concepts. Yes, no, here, there. We use gestures, pictures, anything we can think of to establish a common ground." And so began one of the most extraordinary afternoons of our lives. We drew pictures in the dirt, acted out simple scenarios, pointed to colors and shapes in our surroundings. The forest beings watched, listened, and gradually began to respond. It was slow going at first. Their concept of language was so different from ours that finding common ground was a challenge. But as the hours passed, we began to make progress. We learned that a certain whistle-click combination meant yes, while another meant no. We figured out how they referred to themselves and to us. As night began to fall, we had established a rudimentary form of communication. It was limited, fraught with potential misunderstandings, but it was a start. We had taken the first steps towards bridging the gap between our world and theirs. But our excitement was tempered by a growing awareness of the enormity of what we had discovered. These beings, intelligent, communicative, utterly non-human, had been living alongside us, undetected, for who knows how long. What did that mean for our understanding of the world, of ourselves? As we prepared to return to the cabin for the night, the leader of the forest beings, the one who had first approached us, made a series of sounds we had come to associate with return and sun. We took it to mean they wanted us to come back tomorrow. "We'll be back," Alex assured them, using a combination of words and gestures we hoped they would understand. "We have so much more to learn." As we hiked back to the cabin, our minds reeling from the day's events, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something monumental. We had made first contact with an intelligent, non-human species. The implications were staggering. But as we emerged from the tree line into the clearing where our cabin stood, a sobering thought struck me. What would happen when our trip was over? When we had to return to the world beyond these woods? How could we possibly keep this discovery a secret? And what would happen if we didn't? As we settled in for the night, our conversation turned to these weighty questions. We were no longer just a group of friends on a camping trip. We had become the keepers of a secret that could change the world. The question was, what were we going to do about it? The next morning, we gathered around the kitchen table, mugs of steaming coffee in hand, to discuss our next steps. The excitement of discovery had given way to a more somber mood as we grappled with the implications of what we had found. "We can't just leave and pretend this never happened," Sarah said, voicing what we were all thinking. "These beings, they're intelligent. They're trying to communicate with us. We have a responsibility to them and to the world to pursue this further." "But how?" Lisa asked. "Our trip ends tomorrow. We all have jobs, lives to get back to, and even if we could stay, how long before someone notices we're gone? Before people start asking questions?" Alex leaned forward, his expression serious. "There's also the question of whether we should tell anyone at all. Think about it. If word gets out about intelligent, non-human beings living in these woods, what happens then? Scientists, media, government agencies, they'd all descend on this place. The forest beings' way of life would be destroyed." A heavy silence fell over the group as we contemplated this. He had a point. Our discovery, if revealed, would change everything. Not just for us, but for the forest beings as well. "But don't we have an obligation to share this knowledge?" Tom argued. "This could revolutionize our understanding of intelligence, of life itself. It could change how we view our place in the world." The debate raged on, each of us grappling with the ethical implications of our discovery. Did we have the right to keep this secret? Did we have the right to reveal it? There were no easy answers. In the end, we came to a tentative decision. We would continue our attempts at communication for the remainder of our stay, gathering as much information as we could. But we would not, for now, reveal our discovery to the outside world. We would take time to consider all the implications, to try to understand more about the forest beings and their wishes before making any irreversible decisions. With this uneasy compromise reached, we prepared to head back into the forest. But as we stepped outside, we were met with an unexpected sight. The leader of the forest beings was standing at the edge of the clearing, alone, waiting for us. It made a series of sounds we had come to associate with follow and important. Then it turned and began to move into the forest with that fluid grace that still took our breath away. Exchanging glances of excitement and trepidation, we grabbed our gear and followed. Whatever the forest beings wanted to show us, we sensed it would be significant. Little did we know, we were about to uncover secrets that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the history of our world and our place in it. As we ventured deeper into the forest than we had ever gone before, following our enigmatic guide, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold. Whatever we discovered today, there would be no going back. Our lives, and potentially the lives of everyone on Earth, were about to change forever. We exchanged wide-eyed looks of disbelief before following our guide into the passage. The tunnel was dark at first, but soon began to glow with a soft blue-green light emanating from bioluminescent fungi lining the walls. The air grew warmer and more humid as we descended deeper into the earth. After what seemed like an eternity of twists and turns, the tunnel suddenly opened up, and we found ourselves standing on a ledge overlooking a vast underground cavern. What we saw took our breath away. Spread out before us was an entire city, unlike anything we had ever seen before. Structures that seemed to be part organic and part crystalline rose from the cavern floor, their surfaces shimmering with the same bioluminescent light we had seen in the tunnel. Bridges of what looked like living wood spanned between the structures, and throughout the city, we could see hundreds of forest beings going about their daily lives. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered beside me, her voice filled with awe. It's incredible." Our guide made a series of sounds that we had come to associate with home and city. It gestured for us to follow as it led us down a winding path to the cavern floor. As we entered the city proper, we were struck by the seamless integration of nature and technology. The buildings seemed to grow out of the very rock, their forms fluid and organic. We saw devices that appeared to manipulate light and sound in ways we couldn't comprehend, and everywhere, there was a sense of harmony with the surrounding environment. The forest beings we passed regarded us with obvious curiosity, but none seemed alarmed by our presence. Our guide led us to a large central structure that towered above the others. Inside, we found ourselves in a vast chamber filled with what appeared to be holographic displays and strange pulsating crystals. An older-looking forest being, its skin a deeper shade of green with patterns that reminded me of tree rings, approached us. It made a series of complex sounds, which our guide seemed to translate for us using the rudimentary communication system we had established. From what we could gather, this was some kind of council chamber, and the elder being was a leader of their society. They had been observing us for a long time, debating whether to make contact. Our camping trip, and my solo encounter that first night, had finally prompted them to reach out. As we struggled to communicate, piecing together meaning from gestures and the limited vocabulary we had established, a shocking truth began to emerge. These beings, this hidden civilization, had been here for far longer than we could have imagined. Their history spoke of a time before humans, of watching our species grow and spread across the world. They had remained hidden all this time, watching and learning, but never interfering. Until now, something had changed. something that had prompted them to finally reveal themselves to us. As the elder being continued its explanation, aided by our guide's translations, we began to understand the gravity of the situation. The forest beings weren't just showing us their home out of curiosity or friendliness. They needed our help. The natural world, which they were intrinsically connected to, was changing. They had sensed it long before our scientists had begun to talk about climate change and environmental degradation. The balance was shifting, and they feared for the future of not just their own kind, but all life on Earth. They had chosen to reveal themselves to us because they believed that together we might find a way to address these challenges. Their ancient wisdom and deep connection to nature, combined with human innovation and adaptability, could be the key to ensuring a future for all species on our planet. As this realization sank in, I looked around at my friends. Their faces reflected the same mix of awe, excitement, and trepidation that I felt. We had come to these woods for a simple camping trip, and now found ourselves standing in an ancient hidden city, being asked to help save the world. The weight of this responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential. We were on the brink of a collaboration that could change the course of history, that could redefine humanity's relationship with the natural world. As the elder being finished its explanation, it extended a hand towards us in a gesture that needed no translation. It was an offer, an invitation to join them in their quest to restore balance to our shared world. With hearts pounding and minds reeling, we reached out to accept. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles we might face in bridging our two worlds, we knew that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. A journey that would not only change our lives, but potentially the future of our entire planet. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as we attempted to establish a more comprehensive method of communication with the forest beings. Alex and Lisa worked tirelessly, combining their knowledge of linguistics and biology to create a rudimentary translation system. It was far from perfect, but it allowed us to begin exchanging more complex ideas. As our understanding grew, so did our amazement at the depth and breadth of the forest beings' knowledge. They had been observing and documenting the changes in the environment for centuries, accumulating a wealth of data that dwarfed our own scientific records. Through a combination of their holographic technology and our digital devices, we began to piece together a picture of the global changes they had observed. The patterns were clear and deeply troubling. The delicate balance of ecosystems worldwide was shifting at an unprecedented rate, with consequences that were only beginning to manifest. "This is incredible," Tom murmured as we pored over the data. "With this information, we could revolutionize our understanding of climate change and its effects." But the forest beings' concerns went beyond just climate change. They spoke of subtle shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, changes in the migration patterns of animals we had thought were fixed, and disturbances in the natural cycles of growth and decay that formed the foundation of forest ecosystems. As night fell in the world above, we realized we had been in the hidden city for hours. The concept of time seemed different here, measured more in the ebb and flow of natural cycles than in minutes and hours. The elder being, which we had come to understand held a position similar to a tribal chief or mayor, invited us to stay in the city overnight. We were shown to a series of chambers that had been adapted for our comfort, with bioluminescent lights that could be adjusted to our preference, and strange but surprisingly comfortable organic furniture. As we settled in for the night, our minds buzzing with all we had learned, we gathered to discuss our next steps. "We can't just go back to our normal lives after this," Sarah said, voicing what we were all thinking. "We have a responsibility now, not just to the forest beings, but to the entire planet." Alex nodded in agreement. "But we need to be smart about how we proceed. If we go public with this information too quickly, without a solid plan, it could cause panic, or worse, lead to the forest beings being exploited or harmed." We debated long into the night, weighing our options and responsibilities. By the time exhaustion finally overcame us, we had the outline of a plan. We would return to our world, but not to our old lives. Instead, we would use our respective skills and connections to begin laying the groundwork for a gradual revelation of what we had discovered. Tom, with his background in environmental science, would begin compiling and analyzing the data the forest beings had shared. Lisa would use her biology expertise to study the unique physiology of the forest beings and their symbiotic relationship with their environment. Alex would work on developing more advanced translation tools to facilitate better communication. As for Sarah and me, we would be the liaisons between our world and theirs, coordinating our efforts and ensuring that the wishes and well-being of the forest beings remained at the forefront of our endeavors. As I drifted off to sleep that night, in a chamber deep beneath the Earth's surface, surrounded by the gentle pulsing of bioluminescent light, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation about the path that lay ahead. We were about to embark on a journey that would change not just our lives, but potentially the course of human history. The once simple camping trip had become the beginning of an extraordinary adventure, one that would challenge our understanding of the world and our place in it. As I closed my eyes, I wondered what new wonders and challenges the dawn would bring in this hidden city beneath the forest. The next morning, or what passed for morning in the subterranean city, we were awakened by our forest being guide. It was time for us to return to the surface world. Our originally planned departure date had arrived, and we knew that staying longer would raise suspicions among our families and colleagues. As we prepared to leave, the elder being approached us once more. Through our improved but still imperfect communication, it conveyed a message of hope and responsibility. We were now bearers of a profound secret, custodians of a partnership that could shape the future of our planet. The forest beings would continue to monitor the changes in the environment and would be in contact with us through means they would reveal later. With heavy hearts and minds brimming with new knowledge, we bid farewell to the hidden city. Our guide led us back through the winding tunnels to the forest above. As we emerged into the dappled sunlight of the woodland, it felt as though we were awakening from a dream. But the small communication device the forest beings had given us, a crystal that seemed to pulse with an inner light, was a tangible reminder of the reality of our experience. The hike back to our cabin was filled with quiet contemplation. Each of us was lost in thought, grappling with the enormity of what we had discovered and the task that lay ahead of us. The forest, which had seemed so mysterious and foreboding just days ago, now felt like a second home, a place filled with hidden wonders and ancient wisdom. As we packed up our belongings and prepared to leave the cabin, we made a pact. We would stay in constant contact, coordinating our efforts to gradually introduce the world to the existence of the forest beings and the critical environmental information they had shared. We also vowed to protect the location of the hidden city, understanding the importance of maintaining the forest beings' privacy and security. The drive back to civilization was surreal. The mundane sights of highways, gas stations, and suburban sprawl seemed somehow both familiar and alien after our extraordinary experience. We parted ways with promises to begin our work immediately, each of us heading back to our respective lives with a new sense of purpose. In the weeks and months that followed, we threw ourselves into our tasks. Tom began publishing papers on new environmental data, careful to obscure its true source. Lisa made breakthroughs in her research, introducing concepts of symbiotic biology that were inspired by the forest beings but presented as theoretical models. Alex worked tirelessly on advancing translation algorithms, ostensibly for use in decoding animal communication. Sarah and I coordinated it all, using the crystal communication device to stay in touch with the forest beings and ensure our actions aligned with their wishes. We also began carefully sounding out potential allies, open-minded scientists, environmentalists, and policymakers who might be receptive to the truth when the time came to reveal it. It wasn't easy. There were times when the burden of our secret felt overwhelming, when the magnitude of the task before us seemed insurmountable. But in those moments, we would remind ourselves of the hidden city beneath the trees, of the ancient and wise beings who had entrusted us with their friendship and their knowledge. As the seasons changed and our work progressed, we knew we were on the cusp of something monumental. The day would soon come when we would need to reveal the truth to the world. But for now, we worked in secret, guided by the wisdom of the forest and the hope for a better future. Our camping trip had ended, but our true journey, one that would reshape our understanding of the world and our place in it, had only just begun. 5 years have passed since that fateful camping trip that changed our lives forever. In that time, we've made remarkable progress, but our work is far from over. The world is slowly becoming aware of the forest beings, though the full truth is still known only to a select few. We've carefully orchestrated a series of discoveries and breakthroughs that have gradually introduced aspects of their knowledge and existence to the scientific community and the public at large. The environmental data we've released has sparked a global movement for change, leading to unprecedented cooperation in addressing climate change and habitat preservation. The symbiotic technologies we've developed, based on the forest beings' innovations, are revolutionizing sustainable energy and agriculture. Our team has grown. We've carefully vetted and brought in experts from various fields, each one sworn to secrecy but dedicated to our cause. The forest beings, too, have become more active partners, with small delegations now working directly with human scientists in secure hidden locations. As for the hidden city and the majority of the forest beings, they remain a secret, protected by those of us who understand the importance of maintaining their privacy and way of life. But their influence is felt across the world, guiding us towards a more harmonious relationship with our planet. There have been challenges, of course. Skeptics who question our findings, corporations that resist the changes we're advocating, governments wary of the shift in power dynamics that comes with such revolutionary knowledge. But with each passing day, more people are coming to understand the critical importance of the message we're sharing. As I stand here now, at the edge of the forest where our journey began, I'm filled with a sense of hope. The path ahead is still long and uncertain, but we're no longer walking it alone. We have allies both seen and unseen, a coalition of humans and forest beings working together towards a common goal. The world is changing, awakening to the deeper truths and connections that bind all living things. And it all started with a simple camping trip, a journey into the unknown that became a passage to a new understanding of our place in the cosmos. As I turn to rejoin my friends, my fellow guardians of this precious secret, I can't help but smile. The adventure that began in these woods continues, and the best is yet to come. The future, like the forest itself, is full of mystery, wonder, and the promise of discoveries yet to be made.